What really happened on Christmas morning? The shocking truth behind a father's murder. A doorbell camera captured everything, but by the time police saw the footage, it was already too late. The discovery. The 911 call came in at 6:27 a.m. on Christmas morning, 2024. A teenage girl's voice, trembling and breathless, reported the unthinkable. Her father had been murdered in his sleep by an intruder. "Please, you have to send someone. My dad. There's so much blood. I think he's dead." But as investigators would soon discover, nothing about that Christmas morning was what it seemed. And the truth hiding behind those terrified screams would shake a small Montana community to its core. Before we dive into this haunting case, make sure to hit that subscribe button. This story has twists you won't believe, and your support helps us bring you these deep dive investigations. Now, let's uncover what really happened. Christmas morning, 2024. On December 25, 2024, Michael Harrison was found dead in his bed with 3 gunshot wounds to the chest in his modest single-story home on Billings West Side. His daughter, 17-year-old Sophie Harrison, made the frantic emergency call, claiming that an intruder had broken in and murdered her father while she hid, paralyzed with terror, in her bedroom closet. The small Montana city of Billings, a place accustomed to brutal winters but not to brutal holiday homicides, was stunned by the violence that had erupted in what neighbors universally described as a quiet, respectable household. When Detective Rachel Torres arrived at the snow-covered crime scene, she found the victim still in his bed, the sheets completely soaked with blood. A window in the living room appeared to have been forced open from the outside. Fresh snow on the windowsill had been disturbed. Everything pointed to a home invasion gone catastrophically wrong. Or did it? Sophie Harrison sat wrapped in a shock blanket on the living room couch, her dark hair disheveled, mascara streaked down her pale cheeks, blue eyes vacant and unfocused. She repeated the same story over and over to officers. She had been asleep when gunshots woke her. Terrified, she had stayed hidden in her bedroom closet for nearly an hour before finding the courage to check on her father. When she discovered his body, she immediately called 911. The teenager's account seemed plausible. The forced window, missing valuables, Michael's wallet, his expensive watch, even his laptop. Sophie's convincing display of shock and trauma. Everything pointed to a random act of violence during a burglary. Detective Torres, a 12-year veteran of the Billings Police Department, noted in her initial report that Sophie appeared genuinely traumatized. But years of experience had taught her to trust her instincts, and something about the girl's demeanor felt practiced, rehearsed, like an actress who had memorized her lines perfectly but couldn't quite capture authentic emotion. Still, Torres pushed the thought aside. This was a 17-year-old girl who had just found her father murdered on Christmas morning. Of course she was in shock. Of course she seemed disconnected from reality. But that instinct? It would prove to be absolutely correct. The crime scene. Michael Harrison's bedroom told a story of desperation and violence. The nightstand had been knocked over. A lamp lay shattered on the floor, its bulb crushed into powder. Deep defensive wounds covered Michael's hands and forearms, clear evidence that he had awakened and fought desperately for his life against his attacker. The murder weapon sent a chill through every investigator who saw it. Michael's own .308 hunting rifle, a Remington 700 with a distinctive walnut stock. It had been found discarded in the backyard near the fence line, partially buried in a snowdrift, as if the killer had attempted to hide it while fleeing the scene. 3 spent shell casings were recovered from the bedroom floor. The coroner would later determine that any single one of those 3 shots would have been immediately fatal. 3 shots. Not one panicked pull of a trigger, but 3 deliberate, rage-fueled executions. The timing made everything worse. The medical examiner's preliminary assessment placed the time of death between 4 and 6:20 a.m. on Christmas morning. Someone had murdered Michael Harrison while most of Billings slept peacefully, while children across the city were waking up to discover what Santa had brought them. The brutal irony wasn't lost on anyone. In the rugged landscape of Billings, Montana, where wide-open spaces can feel both liberating and isolating, the Harrison home suddenly became ground zero for the city's attention. Local news crews gathered outside the police tape. Neighbors stood in shocked clusters on their frozen front lawns, their Christmas decorations creating a surreal, almost grotesque contrast to the grim police activity. Sophie was taken to the station for further questioning, ostensibly to get her away from the traumatic scene. She wasn't considered a suspect at this early stage, just a traumatized witness, a victim. Detective Torres ordered a thorough canvass of the neighborhood. In a residential area like this, someone might have seen or heard something unusual in those pre-dawn hours. A car that didn't belong, a figure moving in the darkness, anything that could provide a lead. What they found would change everything, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. A father's love. The Harrison home was a modest 3-bedroom ranch-style house with fading gray siding. Michael had purchased it 10 years earlier, right after his wife Jessica died from ovarian cancer, leaving him to raise their 7-year-old daughter alone. Neighbors remembered how devastated he had been, how he'd thrown himself into being both mother and father to Sophie, never missing a school play or volleyball game, coaching her middle school science club, staying up late to help with homework. He was devoted to that girl, said Mrs. Patricia Chen, who lived 2 houses down and had known the Harrisons for years. Everything he did was for Sophie. That's what makes this so unbelievably tragic. The house had been decorated for Christmas with multicolored lights along the eaves and a small artificial tree visible through the front window. Inside, wrapped presents still sat untouched beneath that tree, gifts that would never be opened. Several board tags reading, "To Sophie, love Dad," in Michael's distinctive handwriting. The kitchen counter held frozen evidence of Christmas Eve preparations, cookie cutters, a rolling pin still dusted with flour, and a plate of decorated Christmas cookies covered with plastic wrap. Michael and Sophie had baked together just hours before his murder. These domestic details stood in stark contrast to the violence that had erupted mere feet away, creating a crime scene that even hardened investigators found deeply unsettling. Michael's bedroom at the end of a short hallway had become his final resting place. The 44-year-old chemistry teacher, beloved by his students at Billings West High School, had been shot while sleeping, then twice more as he tried to defend himself. Blood spatter analysis revealed the brutal sequence. The first shot fired from the doorway while Michael slept. The angle was perfect, calculated. Then, as he awakened and tried to rise, 2 more shots at closer range. The shooter had stayed calm enough to work the bolt-action mechanism of the rifle between shots, a detail that would become crucial later. A panicked burglar, surprised by finding someone home, would have fired once and fled. This killer had stayed, had made sure the job was finished. The daughter. Sophie Harrison was 17 years old, a senior at Billings West High School. Teachers described her as quiet, intelligent, occasionally withdrawn. Her grades had been slipping over the past year, but nothing alarming. Typical teenage stuff, everyone said. She had lost her mother at age 7, a trauma that had bonded her tightly with her father, or so everyone believed. Michael had been strict but loving. He'd set firm boundaries, curfews, expectations about schoolwork, rules about dating and social media. Normal parental concerns. Several neighbors recalled hearing arguments between father and daughter in recent months. Raised voices, slammed doors, the usual teenage rebellion stuff. "I heard them arguing about her curfew just a few days before it happened," said Mr. James Wong, who lived next door. "But honestly, what parent doesn't argue with their teenager? You never think." Sophie's initial statement to police described a completely normal Christmas Eve. She and her father had baked cookies together, watched It's a Wonderful Life, Michael's favorite Christmas movie, gone to bed around 10:30 p.m. She claimed to have slept soundly until gunshots woke her shortly after 6 a.m. Terrified, she'd hidden in her closet until she was certain the intruder had left. Her bedroom door had been closed all night, she insisted. She had seen nothing, heard nothing except those terrible shots. It was a perfect statement. Detailed but not too detailed. Emotional but coherent. The kind of statement that closes cases and lets everyone move on. Except Detective Torres couldn't shake that feeling. Something was wrong. Something in Sophie's eyes when she told her story. A disconnect between her words and her emotions. Torres had seen genuine trauma. This wasn't it. The canvas. By nightfall on Christmas Day, as most Billings families were finishing holiday dinners, the Harrison home remained an active crime scene, bathed in harsh police floodlights. Technicians worked late into the night, documenting blood patterns, collecting fibers, casting impressions of footprints found in the snow outside the forced window. Sophie spent the night at her aunt's house across town, still maintaining her story, still expressing appropriate grief. Detective Torres, however, was already requesting warrants for Sophie's cell phone records and social media accounts. Standard procedure in any homicide investigation, even when family members appeared to be victims rather than suspects. The neighborhood canvass was tedious work. Most residents had been asleep during the relevant time frame. Those who were awake had been focused on Christmas morning with their families. Nobody saw anything. Nobody heard anything. Until they reached 847 Maple Street. Thomas Bradford lived 3 houses down from the Harrisons. He was a software engineer who worked from home, and 6 months earlier, concerned about package thefts in the neighborhood, he'd installed a Ring doorbell camera on his front porch. "I actually forgot I even had it," Bradford would later tell reporters. "I never check the footage unless I get a notification. I had no idea it would capture that." Officer David Kim knocked on Bradford's door late on Christmas evening, asking if he had any security cameras that might have captured anything unusual that morning. "Yeah, I've got a doorbell camera," Bradford said. "But I don't know if it would have caught anything. The Harrison house is 3 doors down. Can we check the footage anyway?" "Sure, absolutely." Thomas Bradford pulled up his Ring app, scrolling back to the early morning hours of December 25th. The camera had a wide-angle view of the street, capturing not just his own property, but a decent portion of the sidewalk and the street in front of neighboring houses. What they saw would break the case wide open and destroy a family's last remaining member. The smoking gun. The footage was time-stamped 5:47 a.m., December 25th, 2024. A figure emerged from the Harrison house, female, teenager, wearing dark clothing and carrying something long, a rifle. The motion-activated camera captured everything in crisp, undeniable detail. Sophie Harrison, not hiding in her closet, terrified of an intruder, walking calmly from her house, carrying her father's hunting rifle, 40 minutes before she would call 911. Officer Kim felt his stomach drop. "Oh my God." The footage continued. Sophie walked to her car, an older Honda Civic parked in the driveway. She opened the trunk, placed the rifle inside, then walked back toward the house. Her movements were deliberate, unhurried. This wasn't panic. This was execution of a plan. She disappeared back inside the house at 5:51 a.m. At 6:27 a.m., she would call 911, screaming about an intruder. In those 36 minutes, she had staged the crime scene, forced the window from the inside, taken her father's wallet and watch and hidden them, disheveled her own appearance, worked herself into a state that would appear to be shock and trauma. "We need to call Detective Torres," Officer Kim said quietly. "Right now." The arrest. Detective Torres watched the Ring footage 3 times, her jaw tightening with each viewing. She'd been right. Her instincts had been correct. But being right gave her no satisfaction, only a deep, bone-weary sadness. A 17-year-old girl had murdered her father, planned it, executed it, and then tried to cover it up with a performance that almost worked. Almost. Torres called the district attorney's office at 11:30 p.m. on Christmas night. By midnight, they had a warrant for Sophie Harrison's arrest. They found her at her Aunt Margaret's house, asleep in the guest bedroom. When Torres and two uniformed officers entered the room and turned on the lights, Sophie sat up slowly, confused. "Sophie Harrison," Torres said, her voice steady but heavy with the weight of what she was about to do. "You're under arrest for the murder of Michael Harrison." Sophie's face went through a remarkable transformation. First confusion, then panic, then something that looked almost like relief. "I want a lawyer," Sophie said. Those were the only words she spoke. At the station, once her public defender arrived, Sophie finally broke. Not into tears, not into denials, into a confession that was both chilling and heartbreaking in its honesty. "I did it," she said flatly. "I killed my dad." "Why?" Torres asked. And that's when the real story, the one hiding beneath the Christmas morning murder, finally came out. The boyfriend. His name was Nathan Drake. He was 23 years old, and he had been dating 17-year-old Sophie Harrison for 8 months. Michael Harrison had found out about the relationship 3 weeks before Christmas. He'd discovered text messages on Sophie's phone, messages that made it clear this wasn't just teenage dating. Nathan was an adult, and Michael's daughter was a minor. Michael had been furious. He'd confronted Sophie, demanded she end the relationship immediately, threatened to report Nathan to police for statutory rape if she refused. Sophie, to her father's face, had agreed. She'd promised to break up with Nathan, to focus on school, to follow her father's rules. It was a lie. She'd continued seeing Nathan in secret, deleting messages, sneaking out at night, spinning an elaborate web of deception. And Nathan, rather than backing away from a situation that could land him in prison, had encouraged it. "Nathan said my dad was controlling," Sophie told Detective Torres during her interrogation. "He said real love means being willing to sacrifice for each other. That my dad was trying to keep us apart because he was jealous and wanted to control my life." "Did Nathan suggest you hurt your father?" Torres asked carefully. Sophie shook her head. "Not exactly, but he said he wished my dad would just disappear, that we'd be free to be together if he wasn't around." In the twisted logic of a teenager desperate to maintain a relationship with an adult who was manipulating her, Sophie had found a solution. She would make her father disappear. The plan. Sophie Harrison had spent 2 weeks planning her father's murder. She'd researched online. She'd studied crime shows. She'd thought through every detail. Christmas morning was perfect. Michael would be home. The neighborhood would be quiet. People would be distracted with holiday celebrations, and the timing would be emotionally impactful. Who would suspect a daughter of murdering her father on Christmas? She'd taken her father's hunting rifle from the locked gun cabinet 3 days before Christmas. Michael hadn't noticed it was missing. On Christmas Eve, they'd baked cookies together, watched their favorite movie. Michael had hugged Sophie before bed, told her he loved her, said he couldn't wait to see her reaction to her presence in the morning. Sophie had hugged him back, said she loved him too, and gone to her room to wait. At 5:30 a.m., she'd risen quietly. Michael was a sound sleeper. He wouldn't wake easily. She'd loaded the rifle, chambering around with practiced movements. She'd learned how to operate it by watching her father prepare for hunting trips. She stood in his doorway for a full minute, she later told police, just watching him sleep. Part of her wanted to turn back, to put the rifle away, wake her father up, tell him everything, beg his forgiveness. But then she thought of Nathan, of the life they'd have together without her father's interference. She pulled the trigger. The first shot woke Michael. He tried to rise, eyes wide with confusion and terror as he saw his daughter standing in the doorway with the rifle. He raised his hands, whether in defense or supplication, Sophie couldn't later say. She worked the bolt, chambered another round, fired again, and again. All 3 shots found their mark. Michael Harrison died on his bed, in his own home, killed by the daughter he'd loved more than life itself. Sophie stood there for several minutes, she confessed, just staring at what she'd done. Then the shock wore off and practical concerns took over. She had to make this look like a home invasion. She'd carried the rifle outside, intending to hide it somewhere away from the property. But she'd panicked, buried it in the snow near the back fence. Then she'd gone back inside and staged everything else. Forced the window, took valuables, messed up her hair and clothing. She'd even practiced her 911 call, making sure her voice would sound appropriately terrified. The only thing she hadn't planned for was Thomas Bradford's Ring doorbell camera. The investigation deepens. With Sophie's confession secured, Detective Torres turned her attention to Nathan Drake. He'd been interviewed initially as part of the standard canvass of Sophie's known associates, but at that point, police hadn't known about the relationship or his potential role in the murder. When Torres and 2 other detectives arrived at Nathan's apartment at 3 a.m. on December 26th, they found him packing a duffel bag. "Going somewhere, Mr. Drake?" Torres asked. Nathan froze. I'm just visiting family." "In the middle of the night? Day after Christmas? It's not illegal to travel." "No," Torres agreed. "But conspiracy to commit murder is." Nathan's face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sophie Harrison, Michael Harrison's murder. Ring any bells?" "Sophie's just a friend," Nathan said quickly. "I heard about her dad. It's terrible. But I had nothing to do with it." "Really? Because Sophie says differently." That wasn't entirely true. Sophie had insisted Nathan hadn't directly told her to kill her father. But Torres wanted to see Nathan's reaction, wanted to push him off balance. It worked. "Whatever Sophie said, she's lying." Nathan's voice rose in panic. "I never told her to hurt anyone. I never—" He stopped abruptly, realizing what he'd just admitted. Torres smiled coldly. "Nobody said you told her to hurt anyone, Mr. Drake. Interesting that your mind went there immediately." Nathan Drake was arrested and charged as an accessory to murder. While Sophie's trial would ultimately determine that Nathan hadn't directly participated in planning the murder, his manipulation of a minor, encouraging her to defy her father, suggesting life would be better if Michael disappeared, and continuing a illegal relationship despite knowing it could result in criminal charges, made him morally, if not legally, complicit in creating the circumstances that led to Michael's death. The community reacts. News of Sophie's arrest sent shockwaves through Billings. The same neighbors who had expressed sympathy for the traumatized teenage girl now struggled to reconcile that image with the cold reality. She was a murderer. "I can't believe it," Patricia Chen told reporters camped outside her house. "She seemed so devastated. I held her while she cried. And it was all an act? How is that even possible?" Billings West High School, where Michael Harrison had taught chemistry for 16 years, became a gathering place for grieving students and faculty. Impromptu memorials appeared. Flowers, candles, handwritten notes expressing love and gratitude for a teacher who had changed lives. "Mr. Harrison believed in me when nobody else did," said Isaiah Martinez, a senior who'd been in Michael's AP chemistry class. "He stayed late to help me study, wrote my college recommendation letters. He's the reason I'm going to pursue medicine, and his own daughter. I just can't process it." The high school's principal, Dr. Sarah Kim, released a statement. Michael Harrison was more than a teacher. He was a mentor, a role model, and a friend. His dedication to his students was unmatched. "We are devastated by his loss and struggling to understand the circumstances of his death. Our thoughts are with all who knew and loved him." The question on everyone's mind: how could a 17-year-old girl murder her own father? The trial. Sophie Harrison's trial began in September 2025, 9 months after the Christmas morning murder. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Jennifer Walsh, made the decision to try Sophie as an adult, a controversial choice that sparked fierce debate in the community and beyond. This was not a crime of passion, Walsh argued during opening statements. This was premeditated murder. Sophie Harrison planned this for weeks. She obtained the weapon. She waited for the perfect moment. She executed her plan with chilling calculation. Then she staged an elaborate cover-up and lied to police. That level of planning and deception demonstrates an adult understanding of right and wrong, and it demands adult consequences. Sophie's defense attorney, public defender Marcus Thompson, painted a different picture. A vulnerable teenager groomed and manipulated by an older man, unable to think clearly. Driven to an unthinkable act by psychological pressures she wasn't emotionally equipped to handle. Sophie Harrison is a child, Thompson told the jury. A child who lost her mother at age 7. A child who was preyed upon by a 23-year-old man who knew exactly what he was doing when he pursued a relationship with a 17-year-old girl. Nathan Drake planted ideas in Sophie's mind, encouraged her rebellion against her father, and created a situation where this tragedy became possible. Yes, Sophie pulled the trigger, but Nathan Drake loaded the gun. The trial lasted 4 weeks. The prosecution presented the Ring doorbell footage, damning evidence that showed Sophie's calculated movements the morning of the murder. They presented her confession, her internet search history, which included queries like how to stage a burglary and can police trace deleted texts, and testimony from classmates about her relationship with Nathan. The defense called psychologists who testified about adolescent brain development, explaining how teenagers, particularly those who have experienced trauma like losing a parent, are more susceptible to manipulation and less capable of fully understanding the long-term consequences of their actions. They called Sophie's Aunt Margaret, who testified about Sophie's devastation after her mother's death, and Michael's struggle to fill both parental roles. But the most impactful testimony came from Michael Harrison's colleagues and students, who painted a picture of a devoted father and teacher who had done everything right and been murdered for it. Mr. Harrison talked about Sophie all the time, testified Sarah Chen, a fellow chemistry teacher. He was so proud of her, so protective. When he found out about Nathan, he was terrified, not angry, terrified. He was afraid Nathan was grooming her, manipulating her. He told me he'd do whatever it took to protect his daughter, and she killed him for it. The jury deliberated for 18 hours. They found Sophie Harrison guilty of first-degree murder. The sentencing. Judge William Blackwood had presided over hundreds of cases during his 23 years on the bench. But he would later say that Sophie Harrison's sentencing hearing was among the most difficult moments of his career. "I have reviewed all the evidence," Judge Blackwood said from the bench, his voice heavy with the weight of what he was about to do. "I have considered the arguments from both sides. I have thought long and hard about justice, mercy, and the purpose of our criminal justice system." Sophie sat at the defense table, her face pale, hands folded in her lap. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, community members, Michael's family and friends, all waiting to hear what consequences Sophie would face. "Sophie Harrison, you murdered your father," the judge continued. "Not in a moment of passion, not in self-defense. You planned this murder for weeks. You waited until he was most vulnerable, sleeping in his own bed on Christmas morning, and you killed him. Then you attempted to cover up your crime with elaborate lies." He paused, removing his glasses to rub his eyes. "The defense has argued that your age should be a significant mitigating factor, that your brain was not fully developed, that you were manipulated by an older man. And there is truth to these arguments. You are 17 years old. Your prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for impulse control and understanding consequences, is not fully mature." Sophie's Aunt Margaret began crying softly in the gallery. "But," Judge Blackwood continued, his voice hardening, "the level of planning involved in this murder demonstrates that you understood exactly what you were doing. You researched how to stage a crime scene. You stole the murder weapon in advance. You chose the specific time and place. You executed your plan with precision. And then you looked police officers in the eye and lied, repeatedly, convincingly." He replaced his glasses and looked directly at Sophie. "The law allows me to sentence juveniles to life without parole in cases of particularly heinous premeditated murders. After careful consideration, I find that this case meets that criteria. Sophie Harrison, I hereby sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole." The courtroom erupted. Gasps, cries, a few people shouting. The judge's gavel cracked repeatedly. Sophie showed no reaction. She simply sat there, staring straight ahead. As the enormity of that sentence settled over her, she would spend the rest of her life in prison. She would grow old behind bars. She would never have the freedom she'd killed her father to protect. "You will grow old in prison," Judge Blackwood said quietly, once order was restored. "You will have decades to reflect on what you did to your father, what you took from him, from yourself, from your community. I hope that reflection eventually leads to genuine remorse. But that remorse will not undo Michael Harrison's death, and it will not reduce your sentence." Sophie was led away in handcuffs. As she passed the gallery, she locked eyes briefly with her Aunt Margaret. No words were exchanged. What could possibly be said? Nathan Drake's fate. Nathan Drake's trial followed 3 months later. The charges were more complex. While he hadn't directly participated in the murder, prosecutors argued he was morally and legally responsible for creating the circumstances that made it possible. He was ultimately convicted of contributing to the delinquency of a minor and statutory rape. The conspiracy to commit murder charges didn't stick. Sophie's own testimony made it clear Nathan hadn't explicitly told her to kill her father, even if his words and actions had influenced her decision. He was sentenced to 12 years in prison, far less than Sophie, but enough to destroy the life he'd been building. His conviction also required him to register as a sex offender for life, effectively ending any chance of returning to normalcy after his release. During his sentencing, Nathan finally showed genuine emotion. "I never wanted anyone to die," he said, his voice breaking. "I never thought. I was just so caught up in the relationship that I didn't think about the consequences. If I could take it back." "But you can't," the judge interrupted. "Michael Harrison is dead because you, an adult, pursued a relationship with a vulnerable teenager and encouraged her to defy and resent her father. You may not have pulled the trigger, but you share responsibility for creating the circumstances that led to murder." The aftermath. In the years following the trial, the Harrison case became a focal point in national debates about juvenile justice reform. Legal scholars and child development experts cited it in arguments about the appropriateness of sentencing juveniles to life without parole, even in cases of premeditated murder. A documentary titled Christmas Morning: The Sophie Harrison Case premiered at Sundance Film Festival in January 2026, presenting a nuanced examination that neither excused Sophie's actions nor ignored legitimate questions about sentencing a 17-year-old to die in prison. Sophie herself declined to participate in the documentary, on advice of her attorneys who were already planning appeals. Her first appeal, filed in early 2026, argued that life without parole for a juvenile constituted cruel and unusual punishment under the Eighth Amendment. It was rejected. A second appeal focused on ineffective assistance of counsel, arguing that her trial attorney had failed to adequately present expert testimony on adolescent brain development and the coercive nature of her relationship with Nathan, also rejected. Legal observers predicted Sophie might eventually find success with federal appeals, but the process would take years, possibly decades, with no guarantee of a different outcome. Michael's legacy. Billings West High School created the Michael Harrison Memorial Scholarship Fund, awarding annual scholarships to students pursuing careers in science education. In its first 5 years, the fund helped 19 students attend college, young people whose lives Michael had touched during his teaching career. A memorial science garden was created on the school grounds, featuring native Montana plants and interpretive signs explaining local ecological systems. A stone marker at the center bore a simple inscription: Michael J. Harrison, 1980-2024. He taught us to see wonder in the world. No mention of how he died, only what he gave during his life. His former students spoke often of his impact. Isaiah Martinez, now in medical school, kept a photo of Mr. Harrison on his desk. Everything I achieve partly because of him, Isaiah told a reporter. He believed in me. He saw potential I didn't know I had, and I'll carry that gift forward for the rest of my life. Catherine Walsh, Michael's sister, established a yearly lecture series at the high school, bringing in scientists and educators to inspire students. She couldn't bring herself to visit Sophie in prison. The pain was too raw, too devastating. "I lost my brother," Catherine said in an interview 3 years after the murder. "But I also lost my niece. Sophie died the morning she pulled that trigger, just as surely as Michael did. The person in that prison cell isn't the little girl I remember. I don't know who she is anymore." Sophie in prison. Prison changed Sophie Harrison. Not immediately. The first year she remained defiant, insisting she'd been unfairly treated, that the sentence was too harsh, that she'd been manipulated and wasn't fully responsible. But time and mandatory therapy slowly cracked that defensive shell. By her second year of incarceration, Sophie had begun the painful process of genuine reflection. She started taking psychology courses through the prison education program, trying to understand her own mind, the decisions she'd made, the relationship with Nathan that had seemed like love, but was actually manipulation. A prison counselor's report from 2027 noted, "Sophie demonstrates increasing insight into her crime. She can now articulate how Nathan groomed her, but also acknowledges that she alone made the choice to kill her father. She expresses genuine remorse, though she understands that remorse cannot undo what she's done." Sophie granted one interview to a graduate student researching juvenile offenders in 2027. She spoke with what appeared to be genuine insight. "I couldn't see it then, but Nathan never loved me. He loved the power he had over me. And I was so desperate to keep that relationship that I destroyed the only person who truly, unconditionally loved me. My father would have forgiven me anything. He would have helped me through anything. And I killed him." She paused, tears running down her face. "I'll spend the rest of my life in here, and honestly, I deserve it. Not because I was 17 and should have known better, but because I did know better. Deep down, I knew what I was doing was evil. I knew my father loved me. I knew Nathan was manipulating me. I knew all of it, and I chose to kill him anyway. That's the truth I have to live with." By 2030, Sophie had earned a bachelor's degree through the prison education program and was working toward a master's in psychology. She'd become a mentor to younger inmates, particularly those who'd committed crimes while in abusive relationships. "I can't save my father," she told her counselor. "I can't undo what I did. But maybe I can help other girls recognize manipulation before they make unforgivable choices. It's not redemption. I'll never be redeemed. But it's something. It has to be something." The Ring doorbell. The Ring doorbell camera that captured the crucial evidence became the center of technological and ethical debates. Privacy advocates pointed to the Harrison case as an example of how everyday surveillance technology was creating a world where private actions were constantly documented and scrutinized. Thomas Bradford, the neighbor whose camera had provided the damning evidence, expressed conflicted feelings. "I'm glad the truth came out. Justice was served. But it's strange. I installed that camera to catch package thieves. I never imagined it would send a teenage girl to prison for life." It makes you think about how these devices are changing society in ways we don't fully understand yet. Law enforcement agencies across the country began incorporating doorbell camera footage into standard investigation procedures. The Harrison case appeared in police training seminars as an example of how private surveillance systems could provide crucial evidence in murder investigations. But the broader questions remained. What did it mean for privacy when our movements were constantly recorded? When did helpful security measures become invasive surveillance? How should society balance safety with privacy? The Harrison case provided no easy answers. 10 years later. A decade after the Christmas morning murder, Billings had largely moved on. The Harrison house was sold, renovated, occupied by a new family who had no connection to the tragedy that occurred there. Michael's name remained honored at the high school through the Scholarship Fund and Memorial Garden. 19 students had received scholarships by 2034, pursuing careers in science and education because a teacher named Michael Harrison had inspired them. Sophie, now 27, continued her life behind bars. She'd completed her master's degree and was working as a prison counselor, helping other inmates process trauma and make better choices than she had. Catherine Walsh had moved to Oregon to be near her children, making peace with her decision to sever contact with Sophie. She contributed annually to her brother's scholarship fund, ensuring his legacy of education and mentorship continued. The case had found its way into criminology textbooks, law school courses, and juvenile justice reform debates. It raised questions society still struggled to answer. How should we treat juveniles who commit adult crimes? At what point does manipulation become an excuse rather than an explanation? Can someone who commits murder at 17 be rehabilitated? And if so, do they deserve the chance? The final word. In the end, the legacy of Sophie Harrison's case extended far beyond one family's tragedy in Billings, Montana. It became part of an evolving national conversation about juvenile justice, digital privacy, and how society should balance accountability with mercy. Sophie Harrison killed her father on Christmas morning 2024. That fact is undeniable, unchangeable, forever written in blood. The question that remains, the question that will outlive everyone involved in this case, is what that murder says about us as a society, about how we treat our children, how we punish their crimes, how we balance justice with mercy, accountability with rehabilitation. Sophie Harrison will, unless juvenile sentencing laws change, grow old and die in prison. She understands this now, accepts it. I took my father's entire future away from him, she said in her one public interview. He'll never see a grandchild, never attend another graduation, never wake up on another Christmas morning. Why should I have a future when I stole his? It's a question with no good answer. Michael Harrison was 44 years old when he died. He had taught hundreds of students, inspired dozens to pursue careers in science, and loved his daughter with complete, unconditional devotion. He died in his bed, killed by that daughter, on Christmas morning. The presents under the tree were never opened. The cookies they baked together were never eaten. The life he'd built, the love he'd given, the future he'd planned, all of it ended in 3 gunshots fired by the person he loved most in the world. That is the full truth of what happened on Christmas morning, 2024. And it is a truth that will echo through the years, a cautionary tale about love and manipulation, about justice and mercy, about choices and consequences. Michael Harrison deserved better. His students deserved to learn from him for decades more. And Sophie Harrison, she deserves to spend the rest of her life confronting what she did. Justice has been served. But peace will never come to the Harrison family. Because some wounds are too deep to heal, some losses too profound to accept, some crimes too terrible to forgive. On Christmas morning 2024, in a modest house in Billings, Montana, a father was murdered by his daughter, and the reverberations of that single act will continue, rippling outward through time, long after everyone involved has turned to dust. The end. This case reminds us that the most dangerous threats sometimes come from those we trust most, that love can be twisted into manipulation, that teenage brains, still developing and vulnerable, can be led to unthinkable places by the wrong influences. And that sometimes justice demands a terrible price, one that will be paid in full over decades behind prison walls. Michael Harrison's students will carry his lessons forward. His legacy of education and inspiration will outlive the tragedy of his death. But the hollow space where a father should be, the Christmas mornings that will never come, the conversations that will never happen, those losses are permanent. Sophie Harrison will have decades to reflect on what she's done, to understand the magnitude of her choice, to live with the consequences of that terrible Christmas morning. Whether that reflection constitutes justice or tragedy depends on who you ask. The only certainty is that Michael Harrison will never see another sunrise, and his daughter will see them only through prison bars for the rest of her natural life.